All right. Now I want to begin with a fun little exercise. Well, it'll be fun for some. Let's see if this thing's going to work. Bang, there you go. Who remembers those 3D magic eye pictures from the 90s? A couple of you remember those. Now, don't call out if you can figure out what this is. I've never done it on this scale before. I don't know if you can figure it out. But for those who aren't aware, the way it works is when you focus on the pattern, if you can go a little bit cross-eyed and you bring two of those patterns together and then hold it, what happens is a special 3D picture appears magically before your eyes. Hands up if you've figured out what this is yet. We got only one person so far. Can anyone else get it? I'll give you a couple of seconds. If you've never done it before, you have no chance of doing it in the next 5 seconds, but can't see it. Only Dave. What do you see, David? It's a dragon. That's right. So if you look at that and go slightly cross-eyed, he's looking at the small version. He's the only one that can get it. I should have tried it on the screen before, but anyway, behind that little pattern is a dragon. All right, now I'm going to take it down because it's just going to distract us. But anyway, the reason I bring this 3D magic picture up, is because that is kind of what the book of Revelation is like. All right? It's a hidden picture book. And if we don't understand this, then we actually risk misunderstanding the message of Revelation. So it's like reading any genre. All right? We don't read a poem, for example, expecting the poem to teach us how to fix our car any more than we read a car manual and expect it to move us emotionally. All right? So in order to understand the book of Revelation, we need to read it the way it tells us to read it. And it tells us to read it as a picture book with hidden symbolism, all right? Hidden symbolism. So I'll give you just one example. If you've got your Bibles open there at Revelation 20, just turn back one page, all right, to Revelation 19, verse 8. Now let me read it out to us. So this is what we looked at last week. It's talking about the bride of Christ. And in verse 8 it says, "Fine linen, bright and clean, was given her to wear." Then in brackets, fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. All right, so in apocalyptic literature, like the book of Revelation is, most things we're shown symbolize something else. We've been seeing this across this series, all right? So this wedding gown for the bride of Christ is not some beautiful white sparkly Versace custom job. It symbolizes the righteous acts of the saints. And we've seen this time and time again. So back in Revelation chapter 1, we were told that the 7 stars were the 7 angels. And also in Revelation 1, we were told that the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. We learnt that the 144,000 in Revelation 7 stands for all of God's people. And the 3.5 years we learnt was a long but limited period of time. All right? Now the list goes on and on. We've been seeing it every week. We look at this symbolism. And if we fail to realize that each of the things we're shown in this book symbolize something else, then we miss the message altogether. All right? Now, with that in mind, we come to Revelation chapter 20, which talks about 1,000 years, or a millennium. That's what 1,000 years is, all right? Now, this is the only passage in the whole Bible that mentions a millennium. The only passage. And if you've been a Sydney Anglican for most of your life, it may be that you've never even heard of the millennium before. Or perhaps you've heard of it, but you just have no idea what to make of it. So I was listening to an English preacher on this passage a little while ago. His name's Sinclair Ferguson. And he said when he was in England, no one ever asked him about the millennium. But when he moved to America, everyone asked him about the millennium, this little section in Revelation chapter 20, all right, about this 1,000 years. It's a big deal for some pockets of the Christian church, in particular in America. Now, the Australian church, particularly the Anglican church, has been influenced more by England, and what that means is it doesn't really mean much to us. We don't think about it a lot. We don't talk about it a lot. But God has put this passage in the Bible for a reason. And our goal for today is to unpack this short little passage, just 6 verses, and try and understand how it applies to our life. Now, this is going to require our thinking caps on this morning, just giving you a pre-warning. But I'm going to have a whole bunch of slides to help us sort of unpack the details today. And call me crazy, but I'm going to open it up for questions at the end. I don't mind looking like a fool if it means maybe helping other people out. I don't know if I'll be able to answer all your questions. Again, I don't know everything about this, but I'll do my best. Let's dive in though. If you've got your news sheet open there, you'll see there's 3 points today. So our first point is looking at the 3 main views on the millennium in the church today. That's the first point. Then we're going to unpack the pros and cons of each of these 3 views, and then we're going to end with looking at the implications. That's our application for today. So let's dive in and see if we cannot bring this pretty pattern into focus and find the hidden picture behind the millennium. And our passage begins with an angel coming down out of heaven in verse 1. Now, this angel, it may be the same angel we saw back in chapter 9, who had the key to the abyss back then, but we can't be certain. And we read this in verse 2. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. All right, and then at the end of that 1,000 years, we're told that the devil is set free for a short period of time. So there's a pictorial representation of what's going on in Revelation 20. Now, the question that has perplexed theologians for centuries is, what on earth is going on with this 1,000 years, with this millennium, where the devil is bound and therefore not able to deceive the nations? Well, there are 3 main views on the millennium, and they are premillennialism, big words, postmillennialism, and amillennialism, or if you're an American, amillennialism. All right? And what we need to understand, before we even start to unpack this, what I want us to understand is that there are very, very smart and very, very faithful theologians who hold to all 3 of these views. And what that means, and they argue their views from the text. Okay? So what that means is we're not just going to need our thinking caps on for the next few minutes, we're going to need a coat of epistemic humility as well. We can't just look down on other people and say, well, they're crazy for thinking those things. There are very smart and very faithful theologians who hold to all of these views. So let's put our caps and our coats on and look at them. And I want to begin with premillennialism. And premillennialism says, so this is all about the end of the world, all right? And it says that Jesus will return before this 1,000-year period, hence premillennialism, okay? So at some undisclosed time in the future, Jesus will return and Satan will be locked up in the abyss. We're not sure what that is, presumably hell, and he'll be locked up for 1,000 years. And all the believers who have died, so that's all the Old Testament believers and the New Testament believers who have died, will be resurrected physically and given their heavenly body, their glorified body, so that they can never die, okay? And this is the first resurrection, according to pre-Mills. Christians who are still alive when Jesus returns will reign alongside these resurrected saints, but a lot of people believe they won't be given their resurrection body, which some people think means, well, many of them might die. Then after the 1,000-year reign, Judgment Day will come. We've all heard of Judgment Day, followed by the new heavens and the new earth, which we're going to be looking at in a few weeks' time. All right, so that's premillennialism. Postmillennialism, similar, but it says that Jesus will return after the 1,000 years, hence post, okay? And according to this view, at a certain point in time, which may have already happened, according to some postmillennialists, we're not sure, but at a certain point in time, the 1,000 years will begin, and this 1,000 years is going to be a golden age of the church, where the whole world is going to be Christianized, and there's going to be wonderful peace and prosperity around the globe, all right? And then at the end of the 1,000 years, Jesus will return, Judgment Day, new heavens and new earth. Now, if you have been a Sydney Anglican for the last couple of decades, pre- and post-millennialism is probably going to sound very foreign to you, very strange to you. The reason being, whether you know it or not, you've been raised an amillennialist. All right? Almost all Anglican churches in Sydney espouse to amillennial theology. Now, the term amillennial, it's a bit of a misnomer because the A in amillennial technically means without. Right? So an atheist is someone without God, an agnostic is someone without knowledge, an amillennialist is someone without a millennium. But that's not actually the case, because amillennialists believe in this 1,000 years. We just believe it is symbolic. All right? Remember, Revelation is a picture book. It is symbolic of a long period of time, and it's the period of time between Jesus' death and resurrection and his return. So between his first coming and his second coming, the cross and the parousia. So according to amillennialism, we're living in the millennium right now, even though it's been 2,000 years. All right? Now, the souls of those, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but this is theology we hear every week here. Well, not every week, but it's theology we're taught here. The souls of those who have been beheaded, the martyrs who have been beheaded because of their testimony, verse 4, have been resurrected, but they've been resurrected spiritually. Right? According to 2 Corinthians 5, when Christians die, our soul is ripped from our body, and our body remains here to rot, okay, while our soul goes to be with the Lord in heaven in what's called a disembodied state, a spiritual state. Theologians call it the intermediate state. We're waiting our final resurrection, okay? And when Jesus returns, these souls will then be resurrected physically. Then comes Judgment Day, then the new heavens and the new earth. Now, if that sounds a bit more familiar to us here, it's because that's the kind of theology we teach here at Elwood Anglican. So even though I've never mentioned the millennium once in 12 years of preaching here, that's the theology we teach in Sydney Anglican Church. It's amillennial theology. But like I said, very smart and very faithful theologians hold to all three of these views. And so the next question is, how can we figure out which one is right? Well, the late, great John Chapman used to say that he was a pan-millennialist. What did he mean by that? He said, I don't know which one it is, but it'll all pan out in the end. Now, he, of course, said that in jest. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, the things God has revealed are revealed so that we can follow them. All right, so pan-millennialism is not really an option. So let's have a look at the pros and the cons of each of these views, and then we'll get to our application in our third point. But we're going to start with post-millennialism this time. The reason being that post-millennialism is by far the least popular view today. There are not many post-millennialists left around today. And the main reason, I think, is because post-millennialism says that the world is going to get better and better as Jesus' return approaches. Whereas most of the teaching of the New Testament tells us that it's probably going to get worse and worse, in particular for Christians. And we saw that in the 7 seals and the 7 bowls and the 7 trumpets, all right? This is things getting worse and worse. So not many people hold to post-millennialism these days. Then comes premillennialism. And there are 3 main arguments that support premillennialism. Tells us that premillennialism is an accurate understanding of this passage. Now, I get this from famed or renowned New Testament scholar Thomas Schreiner. He's just released this year a new commentary, like a major commentary on the book of Revelation, so he knows what he's talking about. And these are the 3 arguments he gives for premillennialism. So number 1, premillennialism makes better sense of the chronology between Revelation 19 and Revelation 20. It just seems that it's sort of flowing out in terms of the time of that. All right, so in Revelation 19, we saw this last week, Jesus returns, okay? And then in Revelation 20, the angel ties up Satan and throws Satan into the abyss. Then comes the millennium. So it just sort of makes sense of the chronology, premillennialism. Second reason premillennialism makes sense is because Satan is currently the god of this world, is he not? All right, so in Revelation chapter 12, Satan is cast down to earth where he can deceive the nations. And you would say that that's what Satan is doing right now. He's like a roaring lion prowling around looking for people to devour. So if we're currently living in the millennium, and that's what amillennialism believes, how can Satan be deceiving people if he's locked up in the abyss? Makes sense. And then the third reason that premillennialism sounds legit, sounds on the level, is like, who are these martyrs that come to life in verse 4? Right? Because when it says the first resurrection, now the Greek word for resurrection is the word anastasis, and in the New Testament, every other occurrence of it, it is referring to a physical resurrection, like Jesus' resurrection. So why would we say that this is a spiritual resurrection here? And add to that the fact that the word come to life, now in the Greek, that's the word, get this right, ezersan. It's the same word used in verses 4 and verse 5. And so amillennialists will say, well, verse 4, that come to life, that's a spiritual come to life. But in verse 5, even amillennialists believe it's a physical come to life. So why would it be spiritual in verse 4, ezersan, and then ezersan be physical in verse 5? It doesn't make sense. So they are physically brought to life. All right, so they're the three pros for premillennialism. All right, you still with me? Both of you? Good. Very technical arguments. Right, this is technical stuff. We're getting to the good stuff in a few moments as to what this means to us. They're the arguments from the text. But there's a big drawback for premillennialism, a big con, pros and cons, and that is, who are these unglorified Christians in the millennium? You see, only those who have died get their heavenly bodies, according to premillennialism. So what is the deal with the unglorified believers? Do they get to reign the whole 1,000 years on this earth? Do they die? Do they just get older and older? Do they have kids? These are all big question marks placed over premillennialism. And they struggle to give sort of an adequate answer on. So that's premills. What about amillennialism? Well, the first pro for amillennialism is that the three arguments for premillennialism are actually easily accounted for in amillennial theology. So let me tell you, let's have a look at it. Firstly, Revelation 20 does not actually have to happen after Revelation 19. It doesn't have to be in chronological order. The reason being that the book of Revelation is not a series of events, it's a series of visions. So we saw that in, like when we saw that the seven trumpets and the seven bowls are not a new set of judgments after the seven seals, they're just a retelling of the seven seals. All right, you've got the seven seals, seven trumpets, seven bowls. They're not chronological events. They're chronological visions of the same events. And so Revelation 20 could just as easily be a flashback to what happened before Revelation 19. It doesn't have to be chronological. Second, outside of this passage, there is only one mention of Satan being bound in Scripture. Now that's in Mark chapter 3 or its sister passage in Matthew chapter 12. And when Jesus talks about Satan being bound, he's talking about his death and resurrection. So it's the passage about the strong man. Jesus says you need to tie up the strong man, right? That's Satan, before you can plunder his house. Now here's the thing. Satan's house has been plundered ever since Jesus' death and resurrection. Right? You see, before the coming of Jesus, every nation other than Israel rejected God. Now what that means is every Gentile, with just a handful of exceptions, went to hell. But after the coming of Jesus, we're now making disciples of all nations, right? Satan no longer has the power to keep the nations in the dark like he did before Jesus came. Right? He is right now bound in that sense. And thirdly, the fact that there is a first resurrection, verse 5, naturally implies there's a second resurrection for believers too. Why would you say there's a first resurrection if there's no second resurrection? The problem for premills is if the first resurrection is physical, then there's no second resurrection for them. All right, so amillennialism says the first resurrection is when deceased believers, like when we die, that's the first death, all right, we go straight to be with the Lord in our spiritual state. We're resurrected spiritually. And then when Jesus returns, comes the second resurrection, which is our physical resurrection. We get our bodies back, and it's a heavenly body. All right? So they're very easily accounted for. The second big pro for amillennialism is that throughout Scripture, the parousia, what does that mean? It means when Jesus returns, it's the second coming of Jesus, always happens on Judgment Day, not 1,000 years before, as premill theology says. And this is why most Sydney Anglicans, including myself, are amillennialists. It just seems to make sense of what the Bible says throughout about the end times. All right, now, for those whose brains haven't exploded yet, let's see how this applies to our lives. Look at some implications for this, because the question we need to ask ourselves is, well, look, so what? We have a standalone passage here about the millennium in which deceased saints come to life and reign with Christ, and in which Satan is bound. What difference does that make to our lives here and now? Well, 3 implications as we close. And the first is, like I said, there are very smart theologians who argue from the text for all 3 positions. Now, just so you know, we actually have a number of committed premillennialists at our church. And so if you find yourself speaking to someone, a Christian brother or sister, who holds a different perspective on the millennium, may we be ever gentle and ever respectful and ever loving and ever kind to these people. This is not the kind of issue that Christians should split over. Now, there are issues that we should split over. All right, so I'll give you an example. Just this week gone by, the Anglican Church in England has voted to bless same-sex marriages. All right, that is a serious breach of the teaching of Scripture. But this passage, that can honestly be translated in various ways, is not a worthy cause for Christians to split. So may we speak lovingly to our brothers or sisters who disagree. Second, no matter how you read Revelation 21-6, there's one common thread for all those views. And that common thread is, in the end, Jesus wins. All right? In the end, Satan and those he has deceived into following him will be punished. Now, the whole point of the book of Revelation is to comfort Christians who are suffering persecution. Now, you and I are not being thrown to the lions like the original readers were, but the government has been talking about bringing in legislation that is going to seriously hamper, this is their state government, is going to seriously hamper our ability as Christians to speak publicly about our faith. I heard just last night, though, that they've put that legislation on hold. They're not going to bring it in next week. Praise the Lord. There's a bit more time to talk about it, but that's what they're thinking about. There is persecution on the rise in the West at the moment. And so whether you are a pre-mill or a post-mill or an a-mill, what we need to know about this passage is, in the end, Jesus wins. We're on the winning side if we're with him. Third piece of application is that if we are living in the millennium now, right, that's what amill theology says, and Satan has been bound through the cross. Now, he's not completely bound, right? He still has some influence, but if he has been bound from deceiving the nations, verse 3, then our job as Christians is to undeceive the nations. Do you understand that every time we make a new disciple, we're plundering Satan's house? And so our job, and if you've tuned out for most of this sermon, this is where you tune back in. This is our take-home, our main take-home for today. Our job is to undeceive the nation. Now, this is hard work. It means first finding out exactly what your friend or family member has been deceived by. Then we have to figure out how the Bible answers that deception. And then we need to speak the truth in love, the truth of the Bible in love, to that friend or family member. And all three of these are difficult steps. So as we close, let me give you advice for all three of these steps. All right. The way you find out how our friend or family member has been deceived, and everyone has different hurdles or barriers between them and coming to faith, you need to ask them probing questions. All right? Ask them questions. What do you think about this? Have you ever thought about that? Do you think our culture is right when it says this? Do you see any dangers from thinking that? And then when you ask those probing questions, you zip it and you listen. And you don't give your view until you're invited to. Now, the invitation usually comes, but if it doesn't, just pray that God will bring that invitation, right? So ask those probing questions and then listen, and they will know that you are actually interested in them. Then second, we figure out how the Bible speaks into that deception. Now, this is going to take hard work. It means research, it means study, it means asking questions of others. But I once knew a guy, this is years and years ago. He was at uni and he would be having questions with different atheists about this, that, and the other. And he was having a conversation with a particular, like an ongoing conversation with a particular atheist. And so what he would do is he would get the atheist to record his question on a tape player. That's how long ago it was. And then he'd take the tape player to his minister, and then he would record the minister's answer, and then he'd take it back to his friend. And it just went back and forth, and it paid off because that guy became a Christian. All right? But the hardest part is speaking the truth in love. All right? Sometimes I just want to grab non-Christians and slap them for thinking those crazy things that they believe. How do we stop ourselves? It's by remembering how Jesus treated us. All right? See, even when I was his enemy, Jesus died for me. And so if Jesus can be patient with me, even to the point of actually dying to get the message through to my stubborn brain, then surely I can be patient and loving and kind and gentle when explaining God's words to my lost brethren. Speak the truth in love. And that's the hidden picture behind this crazy passage. All right? The millennium is symbolic. Like most of the things in Revelation, it is symbolic. It's not an actual 1,000 years. It's been going on for 2,000 years so far. All right? It's symbolic of the time between Jesus' first and second comings, between the cross and the parousia. Those who die in the Lord get to reign with him in heaven. Right? The second you close your eyes in death in this world, you will open them spiritually in the next. It is a glorious future we have. And while we are still here on this earth, we have the very important job of undeceiving the nations. It is a deeply difficult job. But how rewarding to share in plundering Satan's house. All right, now the abyss in verse 3 is likely the earth. Again, it's symbolic. That's where he was cast in chapter 12, same place. And so while he's bound, awaiting the end, may we work hard at our very important job and plunder Satan's house by making disciples of all nations. All right. I promised question time. Let's see how we go. Peter. Yep. Go on. Yeah. Okay, so Peter is talking about another theological term called the rapture. And that's another term that you will have never heard me use from up the front. And it's because amillennialists don't believe in the rapture in the same way that premillennialists do. So the rapture, it's referring to that passage. I was going to look it up. I can't remember which passage it is. But the passage that Peter talked about is that when two will be sharing a bed together, one will be taken and then the other will be left. And two will be sitting at the hand mill together, one will be taken and the other will be left. Now, amillennialists, like Sydney Anglicans, believe that is Jesus' return, where the Christians are taken to be caught up together in the sky with Jesus, and the non-Christians are left to face judgment. But premillennial theology says that the rapture is going to happen in the tribulation leading up to the millennium. Now, there's three different views of that. This is getting really confusing. There's pre-tribulation, there's mid-tribulation, and there's post-tribulation rapture. Some Christians believe that before this difficult period happens, all right, so we saw in the passage today that Satan will be released for a short period of time at the end of the 1,000 years. That's what amillennials believe. We believe that things are going to get worse just before Jesus returns. So we believe there will be we don't use the term tribulation, but we think that things are going to get progressively worse when the Antichrist comes, whoever that is, okay? Premillennialists think, well, during that tribulation time, Christians are going to be taken away. That's not what we believe. Now, Peter said, it seems that things are doing well in that passage from the Gospels. I'm not sure if I would say that. I'm not sure if I would say that things are doing well. I would say that that passage just says things are going to continue to go on. People will be given and receiving in marriage. People will be working. People will be just getting on with their lives. I don't think it necessarily says that things are going to be a good time. I don't know if I would agree with that. But the answer to the question is the rapture is a whole nother kettle of fish that premillennialists believe in. Amillennialists believe that we will be removed from this world, but it will happen on Judgment Day. It won't happen before or during this tribulation, before or during the millennium. But that's a lot of confusion there. But I hope I've done a little bit of justice to that question. But a good question. Thanks, Peter. And the reason this sounds very foreign to us is we don't teach this kind of stuff in Sydney Anglican churches usually. Christine. Oh, is that chapter 5? Oh, yeah. They had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads. Yeah. So, look, this is going back to one of the sermons we looked at last year about what the mark of the beast is. And again, it's symbolic. And from recollections, going back a while now, I can't remember what I preached on last week, let alone last year. It's symbolic of basically just signing up for. So the beast is this world, basically. It's the economic world, all right. And the mark of the beast or the number of the beast, it's basically us signing up for what the world wants us to sign up for. And so what it's saying here is those who don't do that are the Christians. We don't follow what the world follows. We don't pursue what the world pursues. We don't do what the world tells us we should be doing. We do what God tells us we should be doing. And Christians are the ones that don't receive the mark of the beast and that don't worship the beast. We're the ones that worship the Lord. And so they're the ones that will, what does it say in verse 5? They're the ones that come alive. Yeah. Good question. Sharon. So you have to speak up a little bit. Yes, so Sharon's talking about a passage in the Bible that we looked at last year. It's about, so the people that receive the mark of the beast, they get it marked on their hand and on their forehead. Now again, symbolic. Everything in Revelation is symbolic, all right? And so when it talks about getting marked on your hand and on your forehead, it's basically symbolic that you have received, to receive the mark of the beast basically means you've signed up for what the beast wants. And the beast, remember, is our non-Christian economic world. It's all about this is where you find happiness. And so, if you want to sign up for the non-Christian economic world, that's how you can work and that's how you can buy and sell things. You need to do things the way the world tells us to do it. I don't think, so a lot of people think we're going to get an actual mark. And there's a lot of speculation. What is the mark of the beast? Is it credit cards? Because we've got our credit cards on us at all times. Or are we going to get little implants of credit cards in our hands so that we can just swipe our hand when we go to the shop? These things are all this kind of, this speculation over what the mark of the beast is. Again, what I would just say is it's symbolic. We're not going to get a literal mark, in my opinion. It is symbolic of the fact that we have signed up for what the world tells us we should sign up for. And the message to Christians is don't do that. Stay with the Lord. But good question, Sharon. Dave, is that a hand or a stretch? Great, go. What? All right. Well, that's a very good question. What does it mean to be a priest of God and of Christ? So a priest, how would you put this? There is the priest, I think it's talking about the priesthood of all believers. Okay? So the priesthood of all believers means you and I are not a high priest. There's only one high priest, that's Jesus, but he employs us as his disciples, as his priests, and priests are to intercede with the world. We are to go out to the world and do God's work, which is making disciples of all nations, all right? So we are to live good, exemplary lives. You've got to be a good role model. You've got to follow the Lord, and you've got to go out and tell others about the Lord. And so that happens, though, according to amillennialists, we are reigning with God in heaven. So there's going to be some sort of priestly function that we're going to do in heaven as well. And I'm not sure I know what that is. But I suspect it's to do with praising God and serving him and worshipping him in heaven. That's what I would say that probably is. Yeah. All right, we've got time for maybe one more. Sharon, use your big voice again. Okay, the people who sit on the thrones in heaven, is that going to be all believers, or is it just going to be a select few believers? So that was in this this passage, was it? Which verse was it? I suspect, so that's verse 4, I suspect that they are different people. So I think we know that the 24 elders sit on thrones. It seems that in verse 4 he says, I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony. So I think the little "and" there suggests that it's a different group of people, but we are also told elsewhere that we will be judging as well. So there may be a possibility of that, but I don't think, like when you see the picture of heaven, we see the 24 elders sitting on thrones, and then we see the multitude standing around the throne praising God. So I think we are the multitude. I don't think we're going to be sitting on thrones if we're going to use that. But again, very symbolic language. I don't know if there's going to be literal thrones. All I know is we're going to be having an absolute ball. We'll be having the time of our life, gazing upon the beauty of Jesus and praising him. Yeah. That would be the best way I can answer that. Good questions. Now, friends, look, this is a really deep passage. We're going to come back next week and look at the whole of chapter 20. Now that we've got the millennium sort of under control, a little bit anyway, we're going to look at the whole of chapter 20. But all I want us to take away from today is, regardless of which view you have, our job now is to be undeceiving the nations. And that's what I pray we will continue to work hard at from this week and onwards. All right. We're going to sing now. We're going to sing to our glorious King. And this is a little taste of what we're going to be doing in heaven. We're going to be giving all glory to Christ. So let's stand.